My name is Megan, 33 years old, and I am a financial auditor who just committed the ultimate sin in my family. I refused to be their personal ATM. Last Saturday morning started quietly enough. The morning sun was pouring through our kitchen windows, and the smell of dark roast coffee filled the air. I was just taking my first sip when my phone vibrated loudly against the marble countertop. It was a text from my dad, Richard. The message was demanding and lacked any basic greeting. It simply read, "We need the $80,000 for Ashley's wedding today. Wire it to your mother's account immediately. We have vendors waiting." I stared at the screen. There was no please. There was no inquiry about how my week was going. Just a demand for $80,000 like I was a bank vault they had the combination to. I did not cry. I did not hyperventilate. I simply let out a cold smirk, opened my banking app, and transferred exactly $8.00 to my mother's account. In the memo line, I typed, "Best wishes." Then I set my mug down, walked into the living room, and looked at my husband, Ryan. "Change the smart lock codes," I told him, my voice completely steady. "And disable my parents' access fobs, right now." Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to set a hard boundary with relatives who only saw you as a resource. Growing up in a picture-perfect suburb of Chicago, my family always projected an image of flawless success. But behind closed doors, love was a currency, and I was perpetually overdrawn. My younger sister Ashley was the golden child. Whatever Ashley wanted, my parents Richard and Diane made sure she got. And I was expected to finance the shortfall. Ryan did not even question my request. He put down his tablet, pulled up the home security app on his phone, and immediately began revoking their access credentials. We had given them those fobs for emergencies. Instead, they had been using our home like a vacation lounge whenever we were at work. "Are they really trying to squeeze you for the wedding money again?" Ryan asked, shaking his head as the system chimed to confirm the new security codes. He walked over to the front door, manually checking the deadbolt just to be sure. "They actually asked for $80,000 this morning," I replied, leaning against the doorframe. "And they expect it wired today. The sheer audacity of it is almost impressive." Ryan scoffed, pulling the old backup keys out of the console table drawer. "The same people who could not be bothered to show up to your master's degree graduation last month." He tossed the keys into the trash can. "Let us not forget, they had a very important dress fitting to attend," I said, the sarcasm dripping from my words. I remembered standing in the university auditorium holding my diploma in a sea of celebrating families. I had scanned the crowd for 30 minutes. Nobody came. My parents had texted me earlier that morning claiming Ashley was having a meltdown over the lace detailing on her bridal gown, and they simply could not leave her alone in such a state. They missed the culmination of 3 years of grueling late-night studying for a dress fitting. Yet here they were demanding the equivalent of a down payment on a house to fund a lavish country club party they promised her future in-laws. Ryan walked over and wrapped his arms around me. "You know they are going to show up here, right? They are not going to take an $8 transfer lightly." I looked up at him, feeling the solid, grounding presence that had kept me sane for the past 5 years. "I know," I said. "Let them come. This house is legally yours and mine. They have no power here anymore." For years, I had played the role of the quiet, obedient daughter. I had worked twice as hard for a fraction of the approval Ashley received simply for existing. As an auditor, my entire career was built on finding discrepancies, tracking missing funds, and exposing lies. Now the skills I used to protect corporate clients were going to be used to protect myself. I knew my mother's temper and my father's absolute impatience. They would drive over here demanding obedience, expecting me to cower like I always did when I was younger. But those days were over. I had built a successful life without their help, and I refused to let them tear it down to finance a facade. I took a deep breath and poured myself another cup of coffee. The digital clock read 9:15. It would only be a matter of time before they realized the $8 was not a typo. The countdown had officially begun, and I was finally ready for the impending storm. 2 hours and 14 minutes. That was exactly how long it took for the storm to hit our front porch. Ryan was in the garage organizing his tools, and I was at the kitchen island reviewing a client spreadsheet when the heavy thud of fists against solid oak echoed through the house. It was not a polite knock. It was an entitled aggressive pounding, the kind that expects immediate compliance and fears no consequences. I glanced at the high-definition security monitor mounted on the wall. There they were. My father Richard was furiously jiggling the door handle, his face flushed a deep, unhealthy red with frustration. My mother Diane stood behind him, clutching her designer purse like a weapon ready to swing. Next to her was my 28-year-old sister Ashley, wearing a custom silk blouse and an expression of pure, unadulterated rage. I watched through the camera as my father punched his old access code into the smart keypad. The system flashed a bright red error light, emitting a sharp rejection beep. He punched it in again, harder this time, jabbing the buttons with his thumb. Another red light. He kicked the base of the door, his shiny leather loafer scuffing the fresh white paint. "Open this door right now, Megan. I know you are in there." His voice carried through the thick wood, muffled, but unmistakably furious. I took a slow, deliberate breath, closed my laptop screen, and walked out of the kitchen. Ryan emerged from the garage hallway, wiping grease off his hands with a shop rag. He threw the rag on a chair and raised an eyebrow at me. "Showtime," I whispered. I unlocked the heavy deadbolt, but kept the thick brass security chain firmly engaged. I cracked the door open just enough to see their furious faces, but not enough to let anyone push their way inside. "What is the meaning of this?" my father barked immediately, trying to shove the door inward with his shoulder. The heavy chain snapped taut with a loud metallic clank, stopping him cold. "Why is the keypad rejecting my code? And why the hell did you only send $8 to your mother?" "Because that is all the financial support I will be providing for this wedding extravaganza," I replied, keeping my voice completely level and devoid of any emotion. "And the code is changed because you no longer have access to my home." Ashley pushed past my mother, her perfectly manicured finger pointing aggressively through the narrow crack in the door. "You are being completely unreasonable and psychotic," she shrieked. "You make 6 figures a year as a financial auditor. You literally investigate multi-million-dollar corporate accounts for a living. $80,000 is absolutely nothing to you, Megan. It is literal pocket change. You are just being selfish because you are jealous. I am marrying into a prominent, wealthy family, and you are not." I looked at my younger sister, taking in her genuine, terrifying belief that my hard-earned bank account was her personal wedding fund. "You are right, Ashley," I said calmly. "I do make a very good living. A living I built by working grueling 80-hour weeks while you were maxing out our parents' credit cards on luxury spa weekends. My money belongs to Ryan and me. It is not a slush fund for you to impress Jamal and his high society parents." My mother gasped, clutching her pearls in a dramatic display of fake shock. "How dare you speak to your sister that way on the happiest week of her life? We are a family, Megan. We share what we have." "If we share what we have," I countered, looking directly into my mother's eyes, "then where were you both last month? Where was this deep sense of family loyalty when I was walking across the stage to receive my master's degree?" I stared at the three of them, letting the uncomfortable silence stretch. "You skipped the biggest academic achievement of my entire life because Ashley had a dress fitting. A dress fitting that you apparently could not even afford. So do not stand on my front porch and preach to me about family loyalty." Diane's face contorted into a mask of professional victimhood. She forced tears into her eyes, her voice trembling perfectly. "We raised you, Megan. We put a roof over your head. We sacrificed everything to give you a good life, and this is how you repay your own flesh and blood. You owe us this money. You owe your sister a proper wedding." "I owe you absolutely nothing," I stated, my grip tightening on the edge of the doorframe. That was the breaking point for my father. The veins in his neck bulged as he slammed his open palm against the exterior siding of the house. "You listen to me, you ungrateful brat!" He roared, his spit flying onto the glass pane. "This is my family's property. I am your father, and I have an absolute right to be inside that house. You take this security chain off right now, or I am calling the police and having them force you to let us into our own property." I did not blink. I did not flinch or step back. I just looked at his red, furious face and smiled a cold, calculated smile. Call them, I challenged softly. Please, Dad, call the police. Let us see exactly how that works out for you. He did not hesitate. My father whipped out his phone with shaking hands and dialed 911 right there on my front porch. I listened through the heavy door as he put on his best, distressed citizen voice. He told the dispatcher that his daughter was having a severe mental episode, that I had stolen their personal belongings, and that I was illegally locking them out of their own family property. It was a masterful performance. If I did not know the truth, I might have felt sorry for him. I stepped back from the door and walked into my home office. As a financial auditor, I never left anything to chance. I opened my fireproof safe, retrieved a thick manila folder containing our vital property records, and grabbed my iPad. Ryan looked at me, crossing his arms. "Are they really doing this?" he asked. I just nodded. 10 minutes later, the flashing red and blue lights of two patrol cars reflected off our living room windows. Two uniformed officers walked up the driveway, their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts. My father immediately rushed down the porch steps to meet them, pointing an accusatory finger toward the house. "Officer, thank God you are here," he said loudly, ensuring his voice carried down the quiet suburban street. "My daughter is inside. We let her stay in this house, and now she has changed the locks, stolen our personal items, and is refusing to let us in to retrieve them. She is completely out of control." My mother chimed in, dabbing her perfectly dry eyes with a tissue. "We just want our things so we can leave her in peace." The older officer, a tall man with a stern expression, nodded and walked up onto the porch. He knocked heavily on the door. "Ma'am, this is the police. Please open the door." I unlatched the chain and swung the door wide open. I did not look frantic or out of control. I looked like a professional who was utterly bored by a minor inconvenience. "Good morning, officers," I said, offering a polite smile. "I am so sorry my father wasted your time today." I stepped out onto the porch holding my iPad and the manila folder. Ryan stepped out right behind me, standing tall and looking every bit the protective homeowner. The officer looked between me and my parents. "Ma'am, your father states that this is his property and you have locked them out and stolen their belongings. Is that correct?" I let out a short, dry laugh. "No, officer, it is not." I opened the folder and handed him a crisp, officially stamped document. "This is the deed to this house. My husband Ryan purchased this property 3 years ago, long before we were married. After our wedding, he legally added my name to the deed. You will not find Richard or Diane's names anywhere on that document, nor on the mortgage, nor on the property tax records. They do not own a single piece of wood or brick on this lot." The officer scanned the document, his expression shifting from cautious to visibly annoyed. He looked over at my father. "Sir, is this true?" My father stammered, his face turning a blotchy red. "Well, I am her father. It is family property. We have rights." The officer handed the deed back to me. "No, sir, you do not." I then tapped the screen of my iPad and turned it toward the two officers. "Furthermore," I said, "here is the security footage from 20 minutes ago." I hit play. The high-definition video clearly showed my father violently kicking the base of my front door and threatening to break in. The younger officer let out a heavy sigh and turned to my parents. "Sir, you falsely reported a theft and claimed ownership of a property you have absolutely no legal right to. On top of that, we have video evidence of you attempting to damage the homeowner's door. If your daughter wants to press charges right now, I will be putting you in the back of my cruiser for trespassing and filing a false police report." The color instantly drained from my mother's face. Our next-door neighbor had stepped out onto her porch with her morning tea, watching the entire spectacle unfold. Diane noticed her and physically shrank, mortified that her flawless suburban reputation was unraveling in broad daylight. "We do not want any trouble," my mother whispered, pulling frantically on my father's sleeve. "Richard, let us just go." My father glared at me, his fists clenched, but he knew he was defeated. He spun around and marched toward their luxury SUV. As they piled into the car, Ashley rolled down the back window. Her face was twisted in pure hatred. "You are dead to us, Megan," she screamed at the top of her lungs. "You are going to regret keeping that money." I watched them speed off down the street. I felt no regret, only clarity. The adrenaline of the morning confrontation slowly faded as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across our living room. Ryan and I were sitting on the couch eating takeout Chinese food in comfortable silence. My phone had been aggressively vibrating on the coffee table for the last 6 hours, registering missed calls and angry texts from various relatives my parents had likely spun their web of lies to. I had put it on silent, refusing to engage with the manufactured chaos. But around 8 o'clock, a new notification popped up on the screen. It was a voicemail from my mother, Diane. I set my chopsticks down and stared at the glowing screen. Ryan muted the television and looked over with a knowing expression. "Let me guess," he said, taking a sip of his water. "The guilt trip phase of the operation has officially commenced." I nodded, tapped the screen, and put the message on speakerphone. My mother's voice filled the quiet room, trembling with perfectly rehearsed dramatic tears. "Megan, please pick up," she sobbed, the audio crackling slightly. "You cannot do this to us. You cannot do this to your own sister. You do not understand the position we are in." She took a ragged, theatrical breath before dropping the absolute bombshell. "You know Jamal comes from a very prominent family. His parents are incredibly wealthy. His mother is a retired judge, and his father owns a massive corporate law firm. When we met them for dinner last month, they were judging us, Megan. I could feel them looking down their noses at us. So I told them we were paying for the entire $80,000 wedding at the Oak Ridge Country Club. I promised Jamal's mother we were also handling the down payment on their new house to prove we are of equal social standing. If we do not have that money by tomorrow, the country club is going to cancel the reservation. Jamal's family will find out we cannot afford it. They will cancel the wedding and Ashley will be completely humiliated. Please, Megan, you have the money. You are so independent and successful. Be the bigger person and save your family." The voicemail clicked off, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in our living room. I just stared at the phone, a bitter laugh bubbling up in my chest. So that was it. The great emergency. The absolute crisis that justified attempting to break into my house and demanding my hard-earned savings. It was not about Ashley's happiness at all. It was about my mother's fragile ego and her desperate need to flex a financial muscle she did not actually possess in front of a wealthy African-American family who probably did not even care who paid for the wedding. Ryan rubbed his temples, leaning back against the couch cushions. "Let me get this straight," he said, his voice laced with disbelief. "Your mother lied to a retired judge about having 80 grand lying around, and her grand master plan to cover up that massive lie was to simply demand you empty your bank accounts to fund her delusion." "Exactly," I replied, deleting the voicemail without a second thought. "It is the same toxic dynamic she has played my entire life. She weaponizes my independence while treating Ashley like absolute royalty." We spent the next hour talking through the sheer insanity of it all. I explained to Ryan how this had always been the pattern. When I was 19 and working 2 jobs to put myself through college, my mother called me selfish for not buying Ashley a designer prom dress. When I bought my first used car, she demanded I let Ashley drive it to her sorority events because Ashley needed to keep up appearances. My independence was never celebrated in our house. It was merely viewed as a resource to be harvested whenever Ashley needed a bailout. My parents had groomed my sister to believe that looking wealthy was more important than actually working for it, and they groomed me to be the silent financier of that illusion. "You are not giving them a dime," Ryan stated firmly, taking my hand. "They made this bed with their own lies, and now they get to sleep in it." Jamal is a 30-year-old plastic surgeon. If he wants a country club wedding, he can pay for it himself. I squeezed Ryan's hand, feeling that same cold clarity from this morning wash over me again. "I am not responding to her," I said. "I am not playing the savior, and I am certainly not funding her fragile ego." But as I sat there, my professional instincts began to itch. Something about the timeline did not add up. If the country club needed $80,000 tomorrow, how exactly had my parents planned to get that money before they realized I was not going to play along? They had no savings. Their credit was terrible. I opened my laptop. It was time to do some digging. Before my fingers could even strike the first key on my laptop, my phone screen lit up with a new text message notification. It was a number I barely recognized, but the contact name Ryan had synced to our shared family list gave it away immediately. Jamal, my future brother-in-law. The 30-year-old plastic surgeon who had been treated like absolute royalty by my parents since the day Ashley brought him home. I stared at the notification banner, debating whether to just swipe it away and ignore him entirely. But curiosity got the better of me. I opened the message. It was a massive block of text meticulously punctuated and dripping with unbearable condescension. Megan, the message began. I understand that you and your parents have a complicated history. However, as a fellow professional, I know firsthand the kind of stress a high-powered career can put on a person. You must not let your career stress bleed into your familial obligations. Your mother is currently in tears. I am extremely disappointed to hear that you are refusing to contribute to the wedding, especially after your parents were so generous to promise they would cover the country club and our down payment. Family duty is paramount. It is unbecoming to let your jealousy of Ashley's happiness ruin what should be a joyous occasion for our families. Please wire the funds by morning so we do not have to involve the venue management. Regards, Dr. Jamal Williams. I read the text twice, letting the sheer arrogance of his words sink in. He actually signed it with his title. He was trying to use his status as a surgeon to talk down to me, implying my career as a financial auditor was somehow making me bitter and unstable. He had swallowed my mother's lies completely, buying into the narrative that I was just the angry, jealous older sister who needed to be disciplined by a superior professional. I did not feel anger anymore. I felt a surgical precision taking over my mind. I cracked my knuckles and typed my reply. Jamal, I wrote. I strongly advise you to check your facts before sending another message like this. I am not a bank. I did not make any promises to you or your family regarding wedding funds or real estate down payments. My parents lied to you to save face. Furthermore, any attempt to harass me for money will be documented and handed over to my attorney. Do not contact me again regarding my personal finances. Have a wonderful evening. Send. I tossed the phone face down on the coffee table and pulled my laptop closer. Ryan was watching me from the couch, shaking his head. What did he say? Ryan asked. I gave him a brief summary and Ryan just rolled his eyes. The guy is as arrogant as your sister. They are perfect for each other. I nodded, but my mind was already moving past Jamal. The text had actually clarified something crucial for me. Jamal confirmed that my parents had specifically promised $80,000 to cover both the venue and the house down payment. As an auditor, I look for patterns, anomalies, and specific figures. $80,000 is a very specific amount. If you are going to lie to a wealthy family about paying for a wedding, you usually throw out a vague promise to handle the bills. You do not commit to a hard, exact number like 80,000 unless you actually believe you are getting your hands on exactly $80,000. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as my analytical brain kicked into overdrive. How did my parents plan to get that money before demanding it from me? They had texted me this morning in an absolute panic demanding a wire transfer today. That meant whatever plan they originally had must have fallen through at the last absolute minute, or a payment deadline had suddenly arrived that they could not meet. People with terrible credit do not just magically pull that kind of cash out of thin air. They have no equity in their rented house. They have no valuable assets to liquidate. So where was the money supposed to come from? If they had gone to a traditional bank for a loan, they would have been denied weeks ago. My father's credit score was abysmal after a failed business venture 5 years ago, and my mother had maxed out every credit card in her name to keep up appearances for her country club friends. Yet they had confidently promised Jamal's mother this exact sum. They must have found a lender, but who would lend to them? Unless, of course, they did not use their own names. A cold chill crept down my spine as a horrifying theory began to take shape in my mind. In my line of work, investigating corporate fraud, I saw how desperate people behaved when they were backed into a financial corner. They cut corners. They forged documents. They used assets that did not belong to them. I opened a secure browser window and navigated to the public county records database. I needed to see exactly what kind of financial footprint my parents had been leaving over the past month. I was done reacting to their drama. I was going to follow the money, and I knew exactly where to start digging. I booted up my secure work portal. As a certified financial auditor, I had legal access to comprehensive public record databases that the average person did not even know existed. I started with the county clerk's office. I typed in my father's legal name, Richard, and hit search. The results populated almost instantly, and the financial picture they painted was absolutely disastrous. My parents had always projected an image of upper middle class wealth, but the digital paper trail told a completely different story. I scrolled through page after page of red flags. There were multiple tax liens from the past 5 years. I found a public filing for a recently denied second mortgage on the small townhouse they had downsized to last year. The bank had flat out rejected their application due to a dangerous debt-to-income ratio. I dug deeper, running a soft inquiry on their associated public credit profiles. While I could not see their exact credit scores without authorization, the public aggregate data showed they were completely maxed out. They had open credit lines at 5 different high-interest department stores and 2 recent civil judgments from unpaid medical bills. They were drowning. They were living paycheck to paycheck, floating their lifestyle on minimum payments and sheer denial. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the glowing screen. The math was indisputable. No legitimate lending institution in the United States would ever approve my parents for an $80,000 unsecured personal loan. It was a statistical impossibility. So how did they get the money to promise Jamal's family? A cold dread settled in my stomach. They had to have used a co-signer, or worse, they had completely forged an application using someone else's pristine financial history. My mind raced through the possibilities. Did they use Ashley? No, Ashley's credit was just as bad as theirs. Did they use a distant relative? Before I could spiral any further into the dark rabbit hole of my parents' financial crimes, 2 large, calloused hands gently closed my laptop screen. I looked up. Ryan was standing there, dressed in a sharp charcoal suit, his hair neatly styled. "You promised," he said, gently tapping the top of the closed laptop. "Tonight is about us. No spreadsheets, no county records, and absolutely no drama involving Richard, Diane, or Ashley." I blinked, suddenly remembering what day it was. It was our 3rd wedding anniversary. In the chaos of the morning lockout and the afternoon threatening texts, I had completely lost track of time. I looked down at my sweatpants and oversized university t-shirt, feeling a sudden wave of guilt. Ryan had been planning this evening for weeks. "I am so sorry," I sighed, rubbing my tired eyes. "My brain just cannot let this go. They are hiding something massive, Ryan. I can feel it." "I know they are," he replied, pulling me out of the office chair and wrapping his arms around my waist. "But whatever fraud they are committing will still be there tomorrow morning. Tonight, I am taking my beautiful wife to the best steakhouse in the city, and we are going to celebrate the fact that we built an amazing life together without a single dime of their dirty money. Now go put on that silk dress I love. Our reservation is in 45 minutes. He was right. I needed a mental break. I needed to step out of the toxic fog my family constantly generated and remember the peaceful, secure world Ryan and I had built for ourselves. I took a quick shower, slipped into my favorite evening dress, and forced myself to leave my phone on the kitchen counter. For the next few hours, I was going to be completely unreachable. Ryan drove us downtown to an exclusive high-end steakhouse called the Sterling Room. It was the kind of establishment that required reservations months in advance, featuring dim ambient lighting, mahogany-paneled walls, and waiters in crisp white tuxedos. The moment we walked through the heavy brass doors, the smell of seared ribeye and expensive red wine washed over me, instantly calming my frayed nerves. The hostess greeted us warmly and led us through the bustling main dining room. Low jazz played in the background, blending with the soft clinking of crystal glasses and polite conversation. It felt like a different universe, a world away from screaming matches on front porches and desperate voicemails. Ryan ordered a bottle of vintage Cabernet, and we spent the first 20 minutes just enjoying each other's company. We talked about his latest construction projects and laughed about our honeymoon trip to Italy. For a brief, wonderful moment, my family did not exist. I took a sip of the rich wine, letting my shoulders finally drop. I was safe. I was happy. But the universe has a very twisted sense of humor. As the waiter approached to take our appetizer order, a loud, painfully familiar laugh pierced through the elegant hum of the restaurant. That laugh belonged to my mother. I froze, my hand hovering over my water glass. Ryan looked up, his jaw tightening instantly as he followed my gaze toward the front of the dining room. The elegant hostess, dressed in a sleek black gown, was leading a party of 5 directly toward the large, velvet-lined booth adjacent to our table. Leading the pack was Diane, draped in a flashy, sequined jacket that caught too much light, projecting an air of manufactured royalty. Behind her walked my father, Richard, trying his best to look like a seasoned tycoon, though his suit was clearly a decade out of style. Then came Ashley, clinging to Jamal's arm. Jamal looked perfectly polished in a tailored navy suit, exuding the easy confidence of a successful surgeon. But it was the woman walking beside him who commanded the absolute attention of the room. Judge Sylvia Williams, Jamal's mother. She was a striking African-American woman in her late 60s, dressed in an impeccably tailored cream blazer and matching trousers. She possessed the kind of quiet, terrifying authority that did not need sequins or loud laughter to be recognized. She moved with deliberate grace, taking in the room with the sharp, calculating eyes of a retired circuit court judge who had spent decades dissecting liars for a living. Of all the tables in this massive restaurant, the hostess seated them mere feet away from us. A low, decorative partition of frosted glass and orchids separated our tables, offering just enough concealment that they did not immediately notice us. Ryan reached across the table and gently touched my hand, offering a silent question. "Do we leave?" I shook my head slightly. I absolutely refused to be chased out of my own anniversary dinner. We lowered our voices, effectively becoming invisible spectators to my mother's grand performance. As soon as they were seated, Diane took control of the conversation, her voice entirely too loud. The sommelier approached, and my mother did not even glance at the prices. "We will start with a bottle of your finest Reserve Bordeaux," she announced, waving her hand dismissively. "And bring out the grand seafood tower for the table. We are celebrating the merging of 2 wonderful families tonight." Judge Williams offered a polite, restrained smile, placing her linen napkin neatly on her lap. "That is very generous of you, Diane," the judge said, her voice smooth but carrying a weight that demanded respect. "I understand you and Richard have been managing some rather extensive investments lately. Jamal mentioned you were liquidating assets to cover the wedding and the house down payment." My mother let out another loud, grating laugh. "Oh, absolutely, Sylvia. Richard has been heavily involved in commercial real estate development. We recently sold off a massive portfolio of warehouses downtown. It is wonderful to be able to bless Ashley and Jamal with the fruits of our labor." I nearly choked on my wine. My father had managed a failing hardware store before going bankrupt. I watched Judge Williams tilt her head slightly. "Really?" the judge inquired. "Which development firm does Richard work with? I still have colleagues who litigate zoning laws in the commercial sector. I might know his partners." My father choked on a piece of bread, his face turning blotchy red. Diane quickly intervened, patting his back. "Oh, he uses a private boutique firm, very exclusive," she babbled. I watched the exchange with morbid fascination. The judge was already detecting cracks in my parents' facade, probing their fictional wealth with surgical precision. But Diane was too arrogant to realize she was being cross-examined. As my mother turned her head to dramatically flag down a waiter, her gaze swept across the dining room and slammed right into mine. The color drained from her face as she locked eyes with me through the orchids. She saw my silk dress, Ryan's expensive suit, and the vintage wine on our table. For a split second, I saw genuine panic, fearing I might walk over and expose her lies to the judge right then and there. But I just stared back, offering no greeting. The panic in my mother's eyes quickly vanished, replaced by a dark, malicious glint. She nudged my father under the table and leaned in to whisper something to Ashley. Ashley glanced over her shoulder, a cruel smirk instantly spreading across her face. Diane turned back to Judge Williams, her fake smile returning brighter and more dangerous than before. She had just formulated a plan to punish me for the morning lockout, and she was going to use this captive audience to execute it. For the next hour, I focused entirely on Ryan. We shared a decadent chocolate souffle and reminisced about our early dating years. But it was impossible to completely ignore the circus happening just a few feet away. My parents were ordering with reckless abandon. Through the frosted glass partition, I watched a parade of waiters deliver course after extravagant course to their table. There were towering platters of chilled oysters, imported truffles shaved tableside, and thick cuts of A5 Wagyu beef. My father even ordered a round of 20-year-old scotch, swirling the amber liquid in his glass with practiced arrogance. As an auditor, my mind automatically tabulated the cost of every item that hit their table. They were easily blowing past the $4,000 mark, racking up a tab that exceeded my father's entire monthly income back when he actually had a steady job. My mother was loud, ensuring the entire front half of the restaurant knew they were celebrating a monumental union. She kept referring to Jamal as her son, the brilliant surgeon, while subtly implying to Judge Williams that our family possessed an endless reservoir of generational wealth. It was a masterclass in delusion. Eventually, the plates were cleared, and Ryan raised his hand to signal our waiter for the check. Our meal had been indulgent, but reasonable, a well-earned celebration of our 3 years of marriage. As our waiter nodded and headed toward the point-of-sale terminal, I saw my mother abruptly slide out of her velvet booth. She smoothed her sequined jacket and intercepted the young waiter right by the espresso machine. I watched her lips move rapidly. She gestured grandly toward our table, then pointed back to hers. The waiter hesitated, his brow furrowing in confusion. My mother pressed a manicured hand to her chest, offering him a sickeningly sweet smile, and gave him a firm nod. The waiter typed something into the screen and printed the ticket. My mother practically skipped back to her booth. As she slid into her seat, she leaned across the table and spoke at a volume specifically calculated to reach our ears and echo through the surrounding tables. "Please put your wallets away, Sylvia." She beamed at the retired judge. "Do not even think about reaching for the check. My eldest daughter Megan is sitting right over there. She is so incredibly successful, and she absolutely loves treating us. She insisted on picking up the tab for tonight. It is just her little way of giving back to the family that gave her so much." Judge Williams looked over the partition, offering me a polite, appreciative nod. Jamal smirked, clearly thinking I had finally caved to his patronizing text message from earlier. Ashley just rolled her eyes as if my financial servitude was simply her birthright. A moment later, our young waiter approached our table. He looked incredibly uncomfortable. He placed the heavy black leather folio down next to Ryan's water glass. "I am sorry, sir," the waiter whispered discreetly. "The lady at the next table insisted you requested to combine the checks." Ryan opened the folio. I leaned over to look. There it was, an itemized receipt that was longer than my forearm. At the very top was our steak and wine, totaling roughly $300. Below that was an ocean of absurd charges. The Grand Seafood Tower, multiple bottles of Reserve Bordeaux, the Wagyu, the Scotch. The final total at the bottom sat at a staggering $4,520. Ryan's jaw muscle feathered. He reached for his wallet, his eyes narrowing with quiet anger. He was ready to pay it just to avoid a scene on our anniversary. I put my hand firmly over his. "Absolutely not," I whispered. I picked up the black leather folio and stood up. I smoothed the front of my silk dress and took a deep, centering breath. The low jazz music seemed to fade into the background. I walked the short distance around the frosted glass partition and stepped directly up to their table. The lively conversation instantly died. 5 pairs of eyes locked onto me. Ashley looked annoyed. Jamal looked expectant. My father stared intently at his water glass, suddenly fascinated by the ice cubes. Judge Williams looked up at me, her sharp, intelligent eyes scanning my face, waiting for me to play the role of the devoted, wealthy daughter my mother had just advertised. I did not raise my voice. I did not frown or look angry. I offered a pleasant, terrifyingly calm smile. I reached across the table and gently dropped the heavy leather folio directly onto my mother's dessert plate. It landed with a soft final thud right next to her half-eaten slice of cheesecake. "I am paying for my own anniversary dinner," I stated, my voice ringing with crystal clarity. "I assume the family that promised an $80,000 country club wedding can cover their own steak." The silence that followed my statement was absolute. It felt as though the entire restaurant had collectively stopped breathing. I stood tall, my posture perfectly straight, keeping my eyes locked on my mother. Her jaw actually dropped, and the smug, triumphant smile vanished, replaced by sheer, unadulterated panic. At the end of the booth, Judge Williams leaned back slowly. She did not gasp or look shocked. Instead, she slowly raised one perfectly arched eyebrow. Her sharp gaze flicked from the $4,500 receipt sitting on the dessert plate to my mother's terrified face, and finally to me. The judge was a woman who had spent a lifetime reading the room, and in that single moment she read the entire dynamic of my family. She saw right through the sequins and the lies. Jamal, however, was not nearly as perceptive as his mother. He abruptly stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the polished hardwood floor. His handsome face was tight with indignation. "Megan, this is incredibly inappropriate," he hissed, trying to keep his voice low but failing miserably. "You are causing a scene and embarrassing your sister in front of my mother. As a professional, I would expect you to have better emotional control. You are clearly letting your petty jealousy override your common sense." Ashley immediately buried her face in her hands, letting out a dramatic, breathy sob that sounded exactly like the one she used when we were teenagers, trying to get me grounded. I did not even look at Jamal or my sister. Engaging with a tantrum only gives it oxygen. I turned my attention entirely to the only person at that table whose opinion actually mattered. Judge Williams. I said, my voice warm and completely composed. "It was an absolute pleasure to finally meet you. I hope the rest of your evening is wonderful." She looked at me, a faint, knowing smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Have a lovely anniversary, Megan," she replied smoothly. I turned on my heel. Ryan offered the table a curt, dismissive nod and placed his hand gently on the small of my back. Together we walked out of the dining room with our heads held high, leaving the heavy, suffocating weight of my family's financial disaster entirely on their own shoulders. We paid our actual bill at the host stand and walked out into the cool night air. The valet took Ryan's ticket and jogged off to retrieve our car. We stood on the brick sidewalk, illuminated by the soft glow of the street lamps. The front wall of the Sterling Room was made of massive floor-to-ceiling windows, giving us a perfect, unobstructed view of my parents' table. Ryan folded his arms, watching the unfolding disaster with a grim smile. "Look at them," he murmured. The waiter had returned to their booth. Through the glass, I watched my mother frantically digging through her designer purse. Her movements were jerky and panicked. She pulled out a shiny gold credit card and handed it to the waiter with a forced, tight smile. The waiter nodded and walked back to the point-of-sale terminal near the bar. Less than a minute later, the waiter returned. Even from outside, I could tell his posture was stiff and apologetic. He placed the gold card back on the table, shaking his head. My mother's face turned a violent shade of crimson. She began arguing, pointing at the card, then pointing at the machine. Judge Williams sat perfectly still, watching the chaotic display with the detached interest of an auditor reviewing a faulty ledger. My mother snatched the first card back and aggressively slapped a second card onto the table. The waiter took it, returning moments later with the exact same apologetic shake of his head. 2 declines, on a $4,500 bill. In front of the wealthy family they were trying so desperately to impress. My father was sweating profusely. He was visibly shaking as he patted down his suit pockets. Finally, he pulled out a battered, faded blue card. an emergency high-interest credit line he kept exclusively for sudden car repairs. He handed it to the waiter without making eye contact with anyone at the table. When the waiter finally returned with a printed slip for my father to sign, the relief on my parents' faces was sickening. But the damage was already done. Judge Williams was no longer smiling. She was quietly observing my parents with a look of profound, calculating suspicion. The grand facade my mother had built was cracking wide open, and the $80,000 lie was beginning to bleed through. The valet pulled our car up to the curb. We got in and drove away, leaving them to sit in the ruins of their own arrogance. The drive back to our house was shrouded in a heavy contemplative silence. The streetlights flickered rhythmically across the dashboard as Ryan navigated the quiet suburban roads. Neither of us turned on the radio. The visual of my mother desperately slapping declined credit cards onto that white linen tablecloth was burned into my mind. It was not just a pathetic display of fake wealth, it was a glaring, flashing warning sign. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the passenger window and ran the numbers again. As an auditor, my brain is permanently wired to look for the missing variables in any financial equation. Tonight, the math was screaming at me. If my parents did not have $4,500 in available credit between the two of them, then they were entirely, unequivocally bankrupt. That was a fact. But the lie they had proudly presented to Judge Williams and Jamal was a promise of $80,000 for a country club wedding and a house down payment. You do not promise that kind of specific capital to a retired circuit court judge unless you have a rock-solid plan to acquire it. Ryan broke the silence as he pulled into our driveway. They are completely broke, Megan. They do not have a dime to their names. He put the car in park and turned to look at me in the dim light of the garage. So how on earth were they planning to pay that venue tomorrow morning? That is exactly what is terrifying me, I replied, unbuckling my seatbelt. My dad texted me at 9 o'clock this morning demanding the money immediately. That means whatever plan they originally had in place must have collapsed at the very last second. Or worse, a payment they were counting on fell through and they panicked. They tried to use me as their emergency parachute. We walked into the house and the quiet security of our home wrapped around me, but I could not relax. I dropped my clutch on the kitchen counter, slipped off my heels, and walked straight into my home office. Ryan followed closely behind, leaning against the doorframe as I powered up my laptop. The soft blue glow of the screen illuminated the dark room. I was no longer looking at county records or public filings. The desperate display at the restaurant had shifted my entire perspective. My parents were not just toxic and manipulative, they were desperate. And desperate people do not just stop at lying, they cross legal boundaries. I need to check my own identity, I told Ryan, my fingers flying across the keyboard. In my profession, maintaining an immaculate credit score and a spotless financial background is not just a point of pride, it is a strict requirement for my corporate licensing. A single major flag on my credit report could trigger an internal review at my firm and potentially cost me my job. I had always been careful, but I realized with a sickening jolt that my parents knew my social security number, my date of birth, and my entire residential history. They had all the keys to my financial identity. I navigated to the premium portal of a comprehensive credit monitoring bureau. This was not the free, watered-down version available to the general public. This was a secure, high-level monitoring service I used for my auditing credentials. It tracked every single hard inquiry, every newly opened account, and every address change associated with my name across all 3 major credit bureaus. I typed in my master password, completed the 2-factor authentication on my phone, and hit enter. The loading icon spun on the screen for what felt like an eternity. Ryan walked over and stood behind my chair, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "You think they actually tried to use your name?" he asked, his voice low and tight with anger. "I do not know," I whispered, keeping my eyes locked on the spinning circle. "But they promised exactly $80,000. That is the size of a substantial unsecured personal loan. A loan that requires an excellent credit score, a solid debt-to-income ratio, and verifiable employment history. They have none of those things. But I do." The dashboard finally loaded, displaying a dashboard of my financial health. My overall score was sitting at its usual pristine high 800s. At first glance, everything looked completely normal. My mortgage with Ryan was listed in good standing. My two primary credit cards showed a zero balance. I let out a slow breath, feeling a momentary wave of relief wash over me. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe their plan was simply to extort me all along. But then I clicked on the tab labeled Recent Activity. My stomach dropped violently. The blood drained from my face, and a cold sweat broke out across my palms. Ryan leaned in closer to the screen, his grip tightening on my shoulder. Right there at the very top of the ledger was a glaring red notification that had been posted less than 3 weeks ago. Someone had bypassed my standard security locks. Someone had used my identity, and they had not started small. Right there in bold black text was a newly originated account under the category of unsecured personal loans. The principal amount made the breath catch in my throat. $80,000. The lender was a predatory online financial institution specializing in high-interest bridge loans. It was exactly the type of lender that asked very few questions and expedited funding rapidly as long as the applicant possessed a flawless credit history. I clicked on the Expanded Details tab, my hands physically shaking over the keyboard. The origination date was exactly 3 weeks ago. That perfectly aligned with the timeline of when my mother first bragged to Judge Williams about paying for the country club wedding. Ryan leaned closer, his eyes scanning the digital document illuminating my dark office. How did they bypass the verification? He asked, his voice a low, dangerous whisper. I pointed to the demographic information listed on the loan application. They used my social security number. I explained, feeling a cold, clinical anger completely replacing my initial shock. But look at the address. They did not use our current home. They used the address of the old apartment I rented right after college. They knew I had not lived there in 6 years, but it was still tied to my early credit history. Any physical mail, any welcome packets, or verification letters from the lender would have been sent to a building where I no longer resided. It was a calculated, deliberate move to keep me in the dark while they hijacked my financial identity. This was no longer just a toxic family dynamic involving guilt trips and boundary stepping. This was a severe, premeditated criminal offense. It was felony identity theft. My parents had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. I felt a sudden wave of nausea as the full weight of their actions settled over me. They were willing to completely destroy my financial future, my professional auditing license, and my personal security just to maintain a fake image of wealth for a man my sister was marrying. But as an auditor, I needed the complete picture. I needed to know exactly where that $80,000 went after the loan was approved and disbursed. I pulled up the transaction record attached to the credit inquiry. The funds had not been sent to my mother's personal checking account. That would have been too easy to trace. They were wired directly to a limited liability company called Apex Holdings Group. Ryan frowned, his hands resting heavily on the back of my desk chair. "What is Apex Holdings?" he asked. "I do not know," I replied, opening a new browser tab for the state business registry, "but I am about to find out." I typed the name of the company into the state database and hit search. The results popped up in seconds. Apex Holdings Group was registered exactly 4 weeks ago. The registered agent and sole proprietor was listed as Richard Jenkins, my father. He had set up a shell company solely to receive the stolen funds without triggering immediate anti-money laundering flags at a traditional personal bank. Suddenly, the bizarre events of the morning began to click into place with terrifying clarity. I stared at the screen, a dark realization washing over me. "Ryan," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "The text message my dad sent this morning. The one demanding $80,000 for the venue. That was not an arrogant request. That was a blind panic." Ryan looked confused. "What do you mean? They already had the $80,000. They stole it 3 weeks ago. Why would they text you demanding the same amount today?" I pointed to the repayment schedule on the loan portal. Because of the predatory nature of this specific bridge loan, the terms required a massive first installment payment exactly 21 days after disbursement. That day was today. If they missed that payment, the lender would immediately initiate collection protocols. They would start calling my phone numbers. They would start sending legal notices to my current address. The fraud would be exposed instantly. My parents had likely already spent a large portion of that stolen money on non-refundable deposits, designer clothes for my mother, and paying off their own immediate debts to keep up appearances. When they realized the first massive installment was due today and their bank accounts were entirely empty, they panicked. They texted me demanding I wire money to my mother's account, hoping I would just blindly comply out of deep-seated family obligation. If I had sent that money, they would have used it to pay the very loan they took out in my name. They wanted me to finance my own stolen identity while they walked away clean. I stared at the bright red notification, my eyes scanning the harsh digital letters. Unsecured personal loan approved. Amount $80,000. Lender a mid-tier online financial institution, known for rapid approvals and minimal manual verification. The origination date matched the exact week my mother first met Judge Williams for dinner. I clicked on the loan details, my hands shaking so violently I could barely control the trackpad. The mailing address attached to the fraudulent account was my old college apartment, a place I had not lived in for nearly a decade. But the digital fingerprint, the initial application location, was local. Ryan leaned closer, his eyes narrowing as he read the screen over my shoulder. "Megan, what is this?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "This is how they got the money," I whispered, the horrific reality finally clicking into place. My own parents stole my social security number. They forged my electronic signature and took out a massive loan in my name to buy Jamal and Ashley's approval. The sheer audacity of their plan was breathtaking. As an auditor, I spend my life unraveling complex corporate embezzlement schemes, but this was a crime of brutal, intimate simplicity. My parents knew I monitored my credit, but they also knew I protected my financial reputation with my life. A defaulted loan of this magnitude would not just ruin my credit score. It would trigger an ethics review at my firm. It could cost me my professional licenses and my entire career. They had banked on that exact fear. Their twisted sociopathic logic was flawlessly cruel. They figured they would secure the cash handed over to Judge Williams to look like wealthy benefactors and wait for the first monthly installment to come due. When the bank inevitably demanded payment, they assumed I would quietly pay it off to protect my own livelihood. They tried to trap me into financing my sister's extravagant life through sheer financial extortion. Ryan did not say a word. He just slowly stood up from his lean against my desk. I watched the realization wash over him, followed immediately by a wave of pure, unadulterated rage. He turned around, marched into the hallway, and grabbed his heavy leather jacket off the hook. He snatched his car keys from the ceramic bowl on the console table. The metal keys jingled sharply in the quiet house. "What are you doing?" I asked, quickly pushing my chair back and standing up. "I am going over there," Ryan snarled, his face set in a hard, unforgiving line. "I am going to drive to their townhouse. I am going to kick that front door entirely off its hinges, and I am going to put the fear of God into your father until he hands over every single penny of that stolen money. Nobody touches my wife. Nobody." He was already reaching for the front door handle. I ran across the living room and planted myself firmly between Ryan and the heavy wooden door, pressing both of my hands flat against his chest. "Stop!" I commanded, my voice sharp and authoritative. "Ryan, look at me. You cannot go over there. Megan, they committed a felony," he yelled, his chest heaving under my hands. "They stole 80 grand from you. I am not going to just sit here while those parasites sleep soundly in their beds. And if you go over there screaming what happens next," I challenged, locking eyes with him. "They will deny it. They will claim their identities were stolen too. They will immediately log into their computers and delete the browsing history. They will shred the physical approval notices. They will destroy the paper trail before the police can even secure a warrant." Ryan paused, his jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. His breathing was heavy, but the logic was piercing through his anger. "I am a financial investigator, Ryan," I said softly, dropping my hands from his chest. "I know exactly how fraudsters operate when they are cornered. If we confront them now, we tip our hand. We give them time to fabricate a defense or hide the funds. We cannot just be angry. We have to be smart. We have to be surgical." Ryan let out a long, frustrated exhale, his shoulders dropping slightly. He tossed the car keys back into the ceramic bowl with a loud clatter. "So what do we do?" he asked. "We cannot just let them get away with this." "We are not letting them get away with anything," I replied, a cold, dark resolve settling deep into my bones. The emotion was gone, replaced entirely by the calculating precision of my profession. They think I am just an obedient daughter who will quietly clean up their mess to avoid a scandal. But they forgot what I actually do for a living. I am going to build an airtight, bulletproof legal case. I am going to gather the IP logs, trace the wire transfers, and lock down the evidence so tightly that no lawyer in this state can save them. We are not going to yell at them, Ryan. We are going to destroy them. The next morning, the sun rose over a quiet house. I had not slept a single minute. I spent the entire night sitting at my desk outlining my strategy on a yellow legal pad. At 7 in the morning, I called my firm's senior partner and requested an immediate personal day. I told him I was dealing with a severe, unexpected legal matter involving identity theft. Given the sensitive nature of my profession, he did not ask any probing questions. He simply told me to take all the time I needed to secure my finances. Ryan kissed my forehead, grabbed his keys, and told me to call him the second I needed him before heading off to his construction site. As soon as his truck pulled out of the driveway, I turned my home office into a literal war room. My first target was the online lending institution that had approved the fraudulent $80,000 loan. I bypassed their standard customer service line, digging through corporate directories until I found the direct number for their fraud and risk management department. When the representative answered, I did not sound like a panicked victim. I introduced myself using my professional auditor credentials. I calmly explained that a massive unsecured personal loan had been opened under my Social Security number without my knowledge or authorization. The representative tried to read from a standard script, but I cut him off. I provided my actual identification, verifying my current address, and answering deep credit history security questions that my parents could never possibly know. Within 15 minutes, the representative confirmed the fraud alert. I had the entire account completely frozen. Not a single additional cent could be withdrawn, transferred, or utilized. But freezing the account was just a defensive move. I needed offensive weapons. I demanded the representative email me the complete application packet. I specifically requested the digital footprint logs, the device media access control identifiers, and the electronic signature certificates used to authorize the loan. Because I was the named victim and possessed the credentials to escalate the matter, the bank complied. Within an hour, a secure encrypted zip file landed in my inbox. I opened the file and began dissecting the digital documents. It was a breathtakingly sloppy, desperate job. The electronic signature on the promissory note was legally binding, but the digital trail left behind was glaringly obvious. I ran a quick geolocation trace on the IP address used to submit the application. It belonged to the specific internet service provider servicing my parents' subdivision. The trace pinpointed directly to their townhouse router. Furthermore, the backup email listed on the application was an old university email address I had abandoned nearly a decade ago. But the most damning piece of evidence was the two-factor authentication number. The recovery phone number attached to the fraudulent account was my mother's personal cell phone. Diane had literally tied her own mobile device to a federal crime. With the physical evidence printed and neatly organized in a heavy-duty red folder, I got into my car and drove straight to the local police precinct. I walked up to the front desk and calmly asked to speak with a financial crimes detective regarding felony identity theft and bank fraud. I did not just sit down and hand them a dramatic family sob story. I handed them a fully investigated, airtight prosecutable case. I gave the detective the IP logs, the forged application, the bank records, and the aggressive text messages from my father demanding the exact amount of the loan. The detective took one look at the heavily tabbed file, shook his head in utter disbelief, and officially opened a criminal case. I walked out of the precinct 30 minutes later with a stamped police report and a designated incident number in my hand. But local police were not enough to ensure the absolute destruction of their scheme. I wanted federal oversight. As soon as I arrived back home, I logged onto the official portal for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I submitted a comprehensive, detailed fraud report to their Internet Crime Complaint Center, explicitly detailing the electronic wire fraud and identity theft. I uploaded every single piece of evidence from the IP logs to the police report. The system processed my submission and generated a federal case number. I printed out the federal confirmation page and added it to the red folder. That folder was no longer just a collection of papers. It was a loaded weapon. My parents were busy picking out floral arrangements and tasting catering menus, completely oblivious to the fact that their entire lives were about to implode. The legal trap was now fully armed and permanently locked. My parents had dug their own graves. The only thing left to do was lure them right into the center of the cemetery. I sat at my kitchen island staring at the locked screen of my phone. For the past 24 hours, I had kept my parents completely blocked across all channels. It was a necessary blackout to give me the quiet space to build the federal case against them. But a paper trail, no matter how solid, is always vastly improved by a direct admission of guilt. I needed them to acknowledge what they had done. I needed them to feel so confident in their victory that they would openly boast about the trap they thought they had caught me in. I unlocked my phone, navigated to my contacts, and found my mother's name. With a quick swipe, I removed the block. I ignored the barrage of missed call notifications from yesterday. I opened a new message thread and carefully crafted the bait. Every word had to be perfectly calibrated to stroke her massive ego and feign my own total defeat. I saw the loan. I typed my thumbs, moving methodically over the digital keyboard. I am absolutely furious, but I do not want Ashley's wedding ruined. Let me come to the rehearsal dinner tomorrow night so we can discuss how I'm going to pay this off. I read the message twice to ensure it hit the exact right note of reluctant surrender. It implied that my financial self-preservation had ultimately outweighed my anger, which was exactly the psychological profile my mother always projected onto me. I pressed send. Ryan walked through the front door just as the message delivered. He dropped his tool belt and walked into the kitchen, reading the tension in my posture. "Did you do it?" he asked. "I just sent the text," I replied, sliding the phone across the counter. "I filed the police report this morning and the FBI has issued a case number. The loan is frozen. But if I want to nail them without giving their defense attorney an inch of wiggle room, I need them to admit they knew the loan was fraudulent. I need them to confess on record." Ryan read the text message on my screen and let out a low whistle. "You are inviting yourself to the rehearsal dinner. That is playing with fire, Megan. Jamal's entire extended family is going to be there. The judge, his father, all of his high society relatives. It is going to be a complete snake pit." "That is exactly why I have to be there," I said. "My mother is a narcissist, Ryan. Narcissists cannot resist an audience. If I confront her in private, she will deny and gaslight. But if I walk into her grand performance, into the very event she stole my identity to fund, she will feel untouchable. She will be so drunk on her own manufactured success that she will slip up. I just need to hand her the shovel." My phone buzzed against the marble countertop. We both jumped slightly. Ryan looked at me and I slowly slid the phone back toward myself. It was a reply from Diane. The response time was less than 5 minutes, proving she had been anxiously clutching her phone, waiting for the inevitable fallout of her crime to resolve in her favor. I opened the message. The sheer arrogance radiating from the screen was nauseating. It read, "I am glad you finally came to your senses, Megan. I knew you would do the right thing once you calmed down. We did what we had to do for family. You have the credit score to handle it, and Ashley deserves a perfect day. You may attend the rehearsal dinner tomorrow at the Oak Ridge Country Club. Be there at 7 sharp. Do not make a scene. We will discuss the payment schedule in the lobby after dessert. I handed the phone back to Ryan. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach from the absolute confirmation of her sociopathy. She felt no remorse for stealing my identity and jeopardizing my career. She only felt relief that her extortion plot had worked. She immediately defaulted back to her condescending tone, commanding me how to behave in front of her new wealthy friends. She took the bait, Ryan said softly, setting the phone down on the smooth marble counter. She actually admitted they did what they had to do. She did, I confirmed, pulling the thick red folder full of federal evidence toward me. She thinks she has won. She thinks I am coming to that dinner to kiss the ring and quietly hand over my financial freedom for the sake of family peace. I stood up and looked at my husband with a cold, calculating smile. Let us go shopping, Ryan. I need to find something appropriate to wear to a funeral. We did not actually go shopping right away. As I reached for my purse, my phone began to vibrate violently against the marble counter. It was not a text message this time. It was an incoming call from Ashley. I looked at Ryan, holding up my hand to signal quiet. I tapped the screen to answer immediately, hitting the speakerphone button and sliding my thumb to activate a secondary voice recording application I had downloaded specifically for this purpose. The recording icon flashed a steady red. "Hello, Ashley," I said, keeping my tone perfectly subdued and defeated. "Well, look who finally decided to join the real world." Ashley gloated, her voice dripping with absolute smugness. "Mom just told me you are coming to the rehearsal dinner tomorrow night. I am honestly surprised it took you this long to cave. Jamal was right about you. You just needed to be reminded of your place in this family." I closed my eyes, letting the insult wash over me without reacting. "I just want this whole nightmare to be over, Ashley," I replied softly. "I am still in shock over the loan. I cannot believe Mom actually took out $80,000 in my name." Ashley let out a sharp, dismissive laugh that echoed through the quiet kitchen. "Oh, stop being so dramatic, Megan. Mom knew you would not give us the money willingly, so she just borrowed it for you. You have a great credit score. You make 6 figures. You will be completely fine. It is not like she stole it from someone who cannot afford it." "So you knew," I pressed, making sure my voice carried clearly into the microphone. "You knew she used my social security number to forge that application to pay for your wedding and house." "Of course I knew." Ashley snapped, her arrogance blinding her to the danger. "We all knew. Dad helped her fill out the online forms. Look, you are getting way too hung up on the legal details. We are family. What is yours is ours. We are just reallocating the funds to where they actually matter. Anyway, I am not calling to debate the logistics with you. I am calling to lay down some ground rules for tomorrow night." "Rules," I echoed. "Yes, rules," she demanded. "Just do not wear anything flashy to my rehearsal dinner. You are not the center of attention. You are just there to drop off the first check and apologize to Jamal for your behavior at the restaurant. Wear something plain. Do not embarrass me in front of Judge Williams again." "I will wear exactly what the occasion calls for," I said smoothly. "See you tomorrow, Ashley." I ended the call and stopped the recording. The audio file saved instantly. I played it back, listening to the crisp, clear sound of my sister openly admitting to federal conspiracy and wire fraud. Ryan let out a dark, satisfied laugh. "She just handed you the final nail for her own coffin," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "She is completely delusional." "She is not delusional," I corrected, opening my laptop and transferring the audio file to my secure, encrypted drive. "She is just used to getting away with it. But tomorrow night, the free rides come to a permanent end." I spent the rest of the afternoon compiling the physical packets. I did not just print one copy of the evidence. I loaded a fresh ream of paper into my heavy-duty office printer and began churning out multiple identical dossiers. Each packet contained the frozen loan documents, the forged electronic signatures, the IP geolocation logs linking the crime to their townhouse, the local police report, and the official FBI confirmation page. I placed the audio file on several sleek silver USB drives, attaching one to each folder. I bound them in bright red legal folders, the kind we used at my auditing firm for high-priority fraud disclosures. I carefully made a specific folder for Jamal. I made a separate one for my parents. And most importantly, I made a meticulously organized folder specifically for Judge Williams. I knew that when the bomb went off, my parents would immediately try to lie and gaslight the room. But they could not gaslight physical federal evidence. They could not gaslight a retired circuit court judge who knew exactly how to read a legal document. The weapon was now perfectly forged, sharpened, and fully ready to be deployed. We were going to walk into that extravagant country club, calmly hand over the undeniable files, and happily watch their entire fake empire burn directly to the ground in public. Let them enjoy their little rehearsal tonight. Tomorrow they would finally face the absolute devastating consequences of their own incredibly selfish actions. The next evening, the Oak Ridge Country Club looked like a scene straight out of a luxury lifestyle magazine. Ryan handed the keys to a valet, dressed in a crisp white uniform, and we walked up the sweeping stone steps toward the grand entrance. The venue was breathtakingly expensive, the kind of place that required a massive initiation fee just to walk through the front doors. Massive crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over polished marble floors. A string quartet played softly in the corner of the grand foyer, their music floating over the low hum of elegant conversation and the clinking of crystal champagne flutes. Every floral arrangement was a towering display of white roses and imported orchids. It was a beautiful setting built entirely on an incredibly ugly and desperate lie. I tightened my grip on the handle of my sleek black leather briefcase. Inside were the bright red legal folders, each one meticulously arranged and ready for distribution. Ryan adjusted his dark suit tie, leaned down, and kissed my cheek. "You look incredible," he whispered, his eyes scanning the crowded room. "Are you absolutely ready to do this?" I smoothed the skirt of my dark navy dress. It was a conservative professional cut, exactly the kind of attire one might wear to a high-stakes corporate deposition or a federal hearing. It was certainly not the plain, invisible outfit my sister had commanded me to wear, but it commanded respect. "I am more than ready," I replied, offering him a cool, confident smile. We stepped through the double doors into the main banquet hall, and the sheer scale of the delusion my parents had spun became immediately apparent. The room was packed with Jamal's extended family, and it was an intimidating crowd by any standard. This was not a modest neighborhood gathering. These were highly educated, deeply connected professionals. As an auditor, I habitually catalog the wealth in a room. I recognized a prominent local politician, several high-powered defense attorneys, and senior hospital administrators mingling near the open bar. And floating right in the middle of this high society sea was my mother. Diane was wearing a glittering floor-length designer gown that probably cost more than her monthly rent. She held a flute of champagne delicately in one hand, throwing her head back in forced theatrical laughter as she charmed a group of Jamal's distinguished uncles. She was playing the role of the century, acting like the wealthy, carefree matriarch of a sprawling real estate empire. My father stood a few feet behind her, holding a scotch on the rocks. He was wearing a rented tuxedo that was slightly too tight across his shoulders, desperately trying to look like a man who casually gifted $80,000 to his youngest daughter without breaking a single sweat. It was a pathetic, transparent performance, but the crowd seemed politely oblivious to the fraud standing right in front of them. As we slowly made our way across the room, Ashley finally spotted us near the entrance. She was standing near the towering dessert display wearing a stunning white silk cocktail dress and holding onto Jamal's arm tightly. When her eyes locked onto mine, her bright manufactured smile instantly vanished. She stood up a little straighter and offered a hard, expectant glare. She was clearly waiting for me to walk over with my head bowed in total submission. In her twisted mind, I had been thoroughly defeated. She believed I was only there to quietly pull her aside, hand over the first installment check, and silently apologize for my previous behavior at the restaurant. She wanted me to look broken. Jamal noticed her sudden shift in mood and followed her gaze across the room. When he saw Ryan and me standing there, he let out a visible sigh and offered a slow, incredibly condescending nod. It was the exact look a disappointed principal might give a troubled student who had finally decided to follow the rules after a lengthy suspension. He leaned down and whispered something into Ashley's ear, probably reassuring her that my presence meant I had been sufficiently disciplined by his text message. I did not look away. I did not shrink under their combined arrogance. Instead, I offered them both a wide, genuinely warm smile. I raised my free hand and gave them a cheerful, polite wave across the crowded room. Ashley's brow furrowed in confusion, clearly unsettled by my complete lack of anxiety. She glanced down at the sleek leather briefcase in my hand, but she could not possibly comprehend what it actually contained. She thought I was carrying a checkbook. She had no idea I was carrying a loaded legal weapon, and the countdown to detonation had just officially begun. Ryan pulled out my chair at the head table, positioning us directly across from my parents and next to Judge Williams. I placed the black leather briefcase on the floor against my ankle. Waiters stepped forward to serve the first course, a delicate lobster bisque. The table was large enough to seat 12 people, comfortably making every conversation a public broadcast to the most important guests in the room. As the waiters stepped back, my mother seized control of the conversation. She raised her crystal water glass, her diamond bracelets clinking, and leaned toward Jamal's father, who sat quietly observing. "You know Thomas?" My mother began projecting her voice to ensure everyone heard her. "Raising successful children requires immense personal sacrifice. Richard and I have always believed that family wealth is meant to be shared, not hoarded. We have never hesitated to liquidate our own assets to ensure our girls have the best starts in life." She shot a pointed glare across the table at me, her fake smile remaining intact. "It is such a shame when the younger generation loses sight of those values. Some people become obsessed with their own bank accounts that they forget the true meaning of family duty. But not our Ashley. We are incredibly proud of her. She understands loyalty." Ashley beamed, squeezing Jamal's hand. Jamal offered my mother an approving nod. "Thank you, Diane," he said smoothly. "We deeply appreciate everything you have done to make this weekend perfect. It shows true character." I did not flinch. I took an elegant sip of my bisque, meeting my mother's glare with unbreakable calm. Ryan shifted in his seat, his shoulder brushing mine in silent solidarity. My lack of visible guilt infuriated my mother even more, but before she could launch another insult, a calm voice cut through the tension. "Megan, tell me more about your work," Judge Williams said softly. The entire table pivoted toward the retired judge. She was meticulously cutting a piece of bread, her sharp eyes studying me. "Jamal mentioned you are a financial auditor. That is a highly demanding field. It must take a very particular kind of mind to untangle complex financial messes." I placed my spoon down and turned to the judge. "It does, Your Honor," I replied, making sure to use her earned title. "My firm specializes in forensic accounting and corporate risk assessment. I spend most of my days tracking missing capital, auditing unverified accounts, and exposing financial discrepancies that people have tried very hard to bury." Judge Williams paused, a faint smile touching her lips. "Fascinating. And do you find that people are generally clever when they try to hide their financial indiscretions, or are they mostly careless?" I let my gaze drift slowly from the judge past Jamal and land directly on my mother. Diane's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "They are incredibly reckless," I stated, my voice ringing with crystal clarity. "Most fraudsters operate under the delusion that they are the smartest people in the room. They assume that if they act confident enough, nobody will ever bother to check the paperwork." I picked up my water glass and took a sip before delivering the hook. "In fact, I am wrapping up a complex fraud investigation right now. A case of identity theft and wire fraud. The perpetrators stole someone's social security number to secure a massive unsecured personal loan, unaware that the victim had federal monitoring on their credit file." A sharp clatter rang out across the table. My father dropped his silver fork onto his china plate. He scrambled to pick it up, his face glistening with sweat. My mother kicked him under the table, her eyes darting nervously toward me, but she composed herself, taking a large gulp of champagne. She convinced herself I was merely talking about a corporate client at my firm. Her arrogance would not allow her to believe I was talking about her. "That sounds like an open and shut case," Judge Williams noted, her eyes flicking toward my sweating father before returning to me. "What happens to the perpetrators now?" I smiled warmly at the judge. "The evidence has been handed over to federal authorities," I replied. At this point, it is just a matter of time before the trap snaps. The waiters cleared our soup bowls and brought out the main courses. The tension at the table was thick enough to cut with a knife, but my mother was determined to push through it. She signaled a waiter to refill her champagne glass. The time for hints was ending. My mother was preparing to stand up and deliver her toast, unaware that she was about to light the fuse on her own spectacular destruction. My mother reached for her silver butter knife and tapped it sharply against the rim of her crystal champagne flute. The sharp, high-pitched ringing instantly sliced through the low murmur of the crowded banquet hall. Conversations faded away, and the soft background music provided by the string quartet was paused. All eyes turned toward the head table. Diane stood up slowly, smoothing the front of her expensive designer gown with calculated grace. She signaled to the event coordinator standing near the ballroom doors, who quickly hurried over and handed her a sleek wireless microphone. My father Richard stood up right next to her, puffing out his chest and attempting to look like a benevolent, established patriarch. Diane took a deep theatrical breath. Her eyes glistened with perfectly manufactured tears that caught the light from the chandeliers overhead. Family and friends, she began, her voice echoing softly and clearly through the overhead speakers. Thank you all for gathering here tonight in this beautiful venue to celebrate the union of two extraordinary people. She reached out and placed her manicured hand over Ashley's. Ashley looked up at her, playing the part of the glowing, deeply grateful daughter flawlessly. When I look at Ashley, I do not just see my youngest daughter. I see the absolute best parts of myself in Richard. I see a young woman who understands the profound value of love, commitment, and unbreakable family loyalty. She then turned her gaze toward Jamal, offering him a warm maternal smile. And Jamal, she continued, her voice trembling with fake emotion. From the very first moment Ashley brought you into our home, we knew you were the one. You are a brilliant surgeon, a respectful gentleman, and truly the son we always prayed for. We know that as you two build your lives together, you will inevitably face challenges. But Richard and I have always believed that a strong family provides a solid, unwavering foundation, so the next generation never has to struggle the way we did. We believe in sharing our blessings. The crowd was completely captivated by the performance. A few of Jamal's aunts actually dabbed their eyes with their linen napkins. Then my mother gave my father a sharp, practiced nod. Richard reached behind the draped white tablecloth of the head table and pulled out a massive rectangular piece of foam board. It was a giant, novelty-sized bank check, exactly the kind they use for charity golf tournaments or televised lottery winnings. He held it up by the edges, rotating it so the entire room could clearly see the bold black lettering printed across the glossy front. The payee line clearly read Ashley and Jamal in elegant cursive, and the amount box prominently displayed the numbers 80000. It was absurdly tacky, but for this specific crowd it was incredibly effective. Diane raised the microphone closer to her lips, her voice swelling with immense triumphant pride. To ensure you both start your incredible journey on the best possible footing, Richard and I are absolutely thrilled to present you with this gift. It is an $80,000 contribution to cover the remaining costs of this gorgeous wedding weekend and to serve as the entire down payment for your dream home. The banquet hall erupted. Thunderous applause bounced off the crystal chandeliers and the polished marble floors. Several people cheered loudly. Jamal stood up, his face radiating absolute pride and deep satisfaction. He walked over and hugged my mother tightly, then shook my father's hand with firm respect. Ashley actually squealed, throwing her arms around Jamal's neck and kissing his cheek. I watched Judge Williams closely from my seat. The retired judge smiled warmly, clapping her hands in genuine approval. She leaned over to Jamal's father, whispering something that was clearly complimentary. She looked at my parents with a renewed sense of respect, completely buying into the illusion that they were wealthy, generous benefactors securing their daughter's future. As the loud applause finally began to die down, my mother remained standing. The fake tears vanished from her eyes, instantly replaced by a cold, hard glint. She slowly turned her head and looked directly down the table at me. The giant $80,000 check was resting against the table right in front of her. She offered me a smug, victorious grin. It was a look of pure, unadulterated dominance. In her twisted mind, she had just publicly trapped me. She had made the grand financial announcement in front of 60 high society guests. She believed that I was now entirely backed into a corner, forced to quietly pay off the fraudulent loan to keep up the massive family lie and protect my own pristine career. She expected me to lower my eyes. She expected me to bow my head in total submission and accept my role as the silent, obedient financier of her pathetic fantasy. But I did not bow my head. I simply smiled back. I did not break eye contact with my mother. I slowly pushed my chair back from the table. The wooden legs scraped loudly against the polished marble floor, cutting through the lingering applause like a sharp knife. I stood up, smoothing the skirt of my navy dress, and calmly walked around the head table. I moved with deliberate purpose, closing the distance between us until I was standing directly next to my parents. My father clutched the edge of the giant novelty check, his knuckles turning a stark, bloodless white. My mother's smug grin instantly evaporated into a mask of pure, frantic confusion. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a harsh, venomous whisper meant only for my ears. "What are you doing, Megan? Go sit down. Now is not the time for a speech. You are ruining Ashley's moment." I ignored her completely. I reached out and gently but firmly wrapped my hand around the wireless microphone she was holding. For a brief second, she tried to maintain her tight grip, but pulling away would have caused a physical struggle in front of 60 high society guests. She let go, her eyes darting nervously toward Judge Williams. I turned to face the crowded banquet hall. The room had fallen into a heavy, expectant silence. People were leaning forward in their velvet chairs, sensing the sudden dramatic shift in the atmosphere. I offered the crowd the same warm, professional smile I used when presenting severe audit findings to a corporate board of directors. "Thank you, Diane," I said, my voice echoing clearly through the overhead speakers and bouncing off the crystal chandeliers. I turned slightly to acknowledge my parents, gesturing toward the ridiculous piece of foam board my father was holding like a desperate shield. My parents are incredibly generous. They have always gone to great lengths to provide for our family. However, as a financial auditor, my entire career is built on verifying the true source of capital. I deal in hard facts, verifiable ledgers, and documented truth. And when it comes to a sum as significant as $80,000, I strongly prefer total transparency about where such generous gifts actually come from. On cue, Ryan stood up from his seat at the head table. He picked up the sleek black leather briefcase from the floor and placed it squarely on the white tablecloth. The sharp click of the metal latches opening echoed loudly in the quiet room. He reached inside and pulled out the thick red tabbed legal folders I had meticulously prepared that afternoon. He did not rush. He moved with the calm, deliberate precision of a federal process server. He walked over to Judge Williams first. He placed the heaviest folder directly onto her silver charger plate right next to her crystal wine glass. The retired judge did not say a single word. She simply stared down at the bright red cover, her sharp eyes instantly recognizing the standard binding of a formal legal disclosure. She placed her linen napkin on the table, her posture straightening as her judicial instincts immediately took over. Ryan then moved down the table to Jamal. Jamal glared at Ryan, his jaw tight with deep indignation, but Ryan ignored the posturing entirely. He dropped the second red folder firmly in front of the groom. The heavy thud of the paper hitting the table sounded like a gavel striking a block. Finally, Ryan walked over to Ashley. My sister was no longer glowing with bridal joy. Her face was pale and her eyes darted between the microphone in my hand and the folder Ryan just placed in front of her. She reached out tentatively, her manicured fingers brushing the edge of the thick paper as if she were afraid it might physically burn her. On top of each folder sat a sleek silver USB drive securely taped to the cover page. The banquet hall was dead silent now. The cheerful celebratory energy had been completely sucked out of the room, replaced by a suffocating heavy dread. The aunts and uncles who had been weeping with joy just moments ago were now exchanging highly nervous glances. My mother was vibrating with absolute panic. She took a step toward me, her hands trembling uncontrollably. Megan, she hissed, her voice vibrating faintly through the microphone I was holding. Stop this right now. I am warning you. Do not embarrass us. I turned my head and looked directly into my mother's terrified eyes. I am not embarrassing you, Mother, I said softly, ensuring the microphone picked up every single syllable for the entire room to hear. I am simply providing the vital documentation you conveniently forgot to include with your very generous gift. I turned my attention back to the distinguished guests sitting at the head table. I invite you to open those folders, I instructed calmly, because true family wealth should never be a secret. Judge Williams was the first to comply. With a swift, practiced motion, she flipped open the heavy red cover of the folder resting on her charger plate. Her sharp eyes immediately scanned the top document. It was the official confirmation page from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, complete with the federal seal and a designated case number. She turned the page, her expression hardening into a mask of pure professional stone as she viewed the forged loan application. Jamal hesitantly opened his folder next. His eyes widened in shock as he read the bold print detailing an $80,000 unsecured personal loan taken out under my name. I raised the microphone back to my lips. My voice was steady, cutting through the rising murmurs of the confused guests. That $80,000 was not a generous gift from a successful real estate portfolio, I announced clearly. It was obtained via felony identity theft. My mother used my personal social security number, my date of birth, and my pristine credit history to take out a fraudulent loan. She forged my electronic signature to secure the exact amount she promised for this wedding. And I have just officially reported that crime to the FBI and the local police. Gasps erupted from the surrounding tables. Several guests actually pushed their chairs back physically, recoiling from the head table. Diane let out a strangled, desperate noise. She lunged forward, trying to snatch the microphone out of my hand. She is lying, my mother shrieked, her voice cracking wildly. She is a jealous, bitter liar. She has always hated her sister. Do not look at those papers. They are fake. She fabricated everything to ruin this night. Ryan immediately stepped between us, using his broad shoulders to easily block my mother from reaching me. He did not say a word, he just stood there like an immovable wall. I did not break my composure. If the federal documents are not convincing enough, I said, reaching into my small clutch purse, then perhaps we should hear a direct confession. I pulled out my smartphone, unlocked the screen, and navigated straight to the secure audio file I had recorded just yesterday. I held the phone's bottom speaker directly against the top of the wireless microphone. I looked right at Ashley, whose face was now completely devoid of color. Let us clear up any confusion about who knew what I said, and I pressed play. The audio boomed through the expensive surround sound system. The quality was crystal clear. First, my own voice echoed through the hall, sounding defeated and small. I cannot believe Mom actually took out $80,000 in my name. Then my sister's voice filled the room. It was not the sweet, grateful tone she had used just moments ago during the toast. It was dripping with incredible arrogance and cruel entitlement. Oh, stop being so dramatic, Megan, the recorded. Ashley snapped loudly. Mom knew you would not give us the money willingly, so she just borrowed it for you. You have a great credit score. You make 6 figures. You will be completely fine. It is not like she stole it from someone who cannot afford it. The recording continued mercilessly. The entire banquet hall listened as I asked if she knew about the forged application. Of course I knew. The audio played back, echoing off the marble walls. We all knew. Dad helped her fill out the online forms. Look, you are getting way too hung up on the legal details. We are family. What is yours is ours. We are just reallocating the funds to where they actually matter. I tapped my screen, stopping the playback. A sharp click signaled the end of the recording. The silence that instantly descended upon the room was absolute and terrifying. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpeted sections of the floor. The aunts and uncles who had been weeping with joy were now staring at my parents in utter revulsion. The high-powered defense attorneys and hospital administrators in the crowd completely understood the massive legal weight of what they had just heard. They were looking at my family not as generous hosts, but as confessed felons. I looked down at my mother. The color had completely drained from her face. Her spray tan suddenly looked like dirty paint against her pale skin. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish on dry land, but no words came out. The grand, arrogant matriarch was completely gone, replaced by a terrified criminal, realizing there was absolutely nowhere left to hide. My father had collapsed back into his chair, covering his face with both his trembling hands. The giant check slipped from his grip and hit the floor. The trap had sprung. The trap had sprung. All eyes in the silent banquet hall gravitated toward Judge Williams. She did not look up, nor did she react to the gasps echoing around the room. She remained seated, her posture perfectly rigid, as she turned the pages of the red folder. I watched her eyes track across the printed IP logs, the digital timestamps, and the unmistakable seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. She was a woman who had spent decades presiding over complex fraud cases. She knew exactly what she was looking at. The evidence was irrefutable, and the audio recording had just provided the motive and the confession. My mother gasped for air, her hands hovering over the dropped microphone, but she did not speak. Nobody dared to interrupt the judge. Finally, Judge Williams closed the heavy red folder. The sound of the thick paper slapping against the table was deafening. She placed her hands flat on the white tablecloth and pushed her chair back. When she stood up, her authoritative presence completely dominated the entire banquet hall. She did not yell. She did not lose her temper. She possessed the cold, terrifying calm of a judge about to deliver a maximum sentence. She slowly turned her head and looked directly at my mother and father. Her gaze was filled with absolute, unadulterated disgust. "I have presided over hundreds of financial crime cases in my career, Diane," she said, her voice cutting through the air like a surgical scalpel. "I have seen desperate people do terrible things, but to steal your own daughter's identity, to forge federal documents, and to sit at my table and lie to my face about your generosity." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the room. "You are not just liars. You are criminals." My father flinched as the word criminals left her lips. He sank lower in his rented tuxedo, looking completely deflated. My mother tried to shake her head, her lips moving silently as she attempted to formulate a defense that simply did not exist. But Judge Williams was already done with them. She had passed her verdict, and she was not entertaining an appeal. She turned her sharp, calculating gaze away from my shattered parents and looked down the table at her son. Jamal was sitting frozen in his chair, his eyes darting frantically between his mother and the open legal folder. The arrogant, condescending surgeon who had texted me about family duty was entirely gone. In his place sat a terrified young man, realizing his prestigious life was crashing down. Judge Williams commanded, her voice ringing with absolute, uncompromising authority. "Get your coat." Jamal blinked, his mouth falling open slightly. "Mother, please," he stammered, looking at Ashley, who was now weeping hysterically next to him. "This has to be some kind of misunderstanding. We can fix this." Judge Williams slammed her hand down on the red folder, making Jamal jump. "There is no misunderstanding, and there is absolutely nothing to fix," she stated sharply. "These people committed felony wire fraud and identity theft. They are looking at federal prison sentences. This wedding is permanently canceled. We do not associate with felons. Stand up and get your coat right now." The finality in her voice left no room for negotiation. Jamal looked at his mother's furious face, and then he looked down at Ashley. Ashley was clinging to his forearm, her perfectly manicured fingers digging into the expensive fabric of his tailored suit jacket. "Jamal, do not listen to her." Ashley sobbed, tears ruining her flawless makeup. "I love you. We are getting married tomorrow. You promised me." But Jamal was finally seeing the reality of the situation. He realized that marrying Ashley meant marrying into a federal criminal investigation. It meant his pristine medical reputation would be forever tied to a massive public scandal. He looked at Ashley, his expression twisting from shock into pure horror. He forcefully pried her fingers off his jacket and dropped her hand. He pushed his chair back, the wood screeching against the marble floor. He stepped away from Ashley as if she were carrying a highly contagious disease. The realization hit my sister. The wealthy surgeon, the grand country club lifestyle, the endless social status she had craved her entire life. It was all evaporating right in front of her eyes. Jamal turned his back on his weeping bride, grabbed his coat from the back of his chair, and walked quickly toward his mother. He did not look back. The dream was dead. Ashley let out a guttural wail that sounded entirely out of place in the elegant ballroom. She lunged forward, dropping heavily to her knees. "Jamal, please!" she screamed, scrambling across the polished marble floor to grab the hem of his coat. "You cannot do this. We paid for the house. We paid for the country club." But he kept walking, flanked by his formidable mother and his stoic father cutting a path straight through the crowd. Ashley collapsed, sobbing uncontrollably. The golden child who had spent her entire life believing consequences only applied to other people was finally facing the devastating reality of her actions. The high society relatives who had been cheering for her were now stepping back, giving her a wide, uncomfortable berth. She was no longer a glowing bride. She was a liability tied to a federal crime. The sight of his daughter weeping on the floor shattered whatever fragile grip my father had left on his sanity. He spun around his face a terrifying mask of dark purple and locked his eyes directly on me. "You ruined everything," he roared, making the crystal wine glasses on the head table vibrate. "You jealous, vindictive little brat." He lunged across the short distance separating us, his hands curled into tight fists, completely forgetting who was watching him. He was aiming straight for me. He never made it halfway. Ryan moved with the explosive speed of a man anticipating this exact moment. He stepped squarely into my father's path, bracing his wide stance. When Richard collided with him, Ryan did not budge. Instead, he shoved my father back with a heavy strike directly to his chest. My father stumbled backward, his dress shoes slipping on the marble floor, and crashed hard into the massive dessert table. A towering display of delicate French macarons toppled over, clattering loudly to the ground. "Do not ever step toward my wife again," Ryan warned, his voice low, deadly, and carrying a terrifying promise. "If you try to touch her, I will not wait for the police to handle you." My father scrambled to catch his balance, his chest heaving. "You destroyed your own family," he spat, pointing a shaking finger. "We only took that money to give your sister a future. You could have just quietly paid the installments. It would have meant nothing to your bank account. But you had to destroy us out of spite." "I did not destroy anything, Dad," I replied, my voice perfectly level. "You destroyed yourselves the very second you decided my identity was yours to steal. You committed a severe federal crime to throw a fancy party. Do not stand there and blame me for your profound financial incompetence and sociopathic greed." My mother was frantically scrambling around the head table, gathering the red folders Jamal and Judge Williams had left behind. She was acting purely on panicked instinct, trying to hide the physical evidence, as if that would magically erase the digital trail the FBI possessed. "Nobody look at these documents," she babbled to the surrounding guests, pressing the folders tightly against her chest. "She is a malicious liar. This is all a horrible family misunderstanding. We are leaving right now. Richard, grab Ashley. We are going home." She grabbed my father's sleeve, pulling him toward the side exit, desperate to escape the hundreds of judging eyes. But her escape route was already permanently sealed. I turned my attention toward the massive windows that overlooked the grand circular driveway. "You are not going home, Diane," I stated calmly. Right on cue, the dark night outside the expansive windows was suddenly illuminated by brilliant flashing strobes of red and blue light. The piercing wail of police sirens cut through the quiet neighborhood, growing louder by the second. Heavy tires of 3 patrol cars screeched against the asphalt as they pulled directly up to the main entrance, aggressively blocking the valet stand. The guests gasped, turning toward the windows in absolute shock. My mother froze dead in her tracks, the red folders slipping from her grasp and scattering across the marble floor. She looked at the flashing lights in primal terror. "Did you really think I would just hand over federal evidence and let you walk away to formulate a defense?" I asked her. When I filed the police report this morning, I gave the financial crimes detective a copy of this rehearsal dinner invitation. I updated him on your exact location an hour ago. The FBI might take a few weeks to build their indictment, but the local police are here right now to collect you for felony wire fraud. The party is officially over. The heavy double doors of the banquet hall swung open with a resounding crash that echoed over the dead silence of the room. 4 uniformed police officers and 2 plainclothes detectives strode into the elegant space. Their heavy tactical boots thudded against the polished marble floor, a harsh and entirely out-of-place sound among the designer gowns and tailored suits. The string quartet had long since stopped playing, and the only noise was the synchronized marching of law enforcement, cutting a direct path through the sea of horrified high society guests. The lead detective, the same man I had handed the thick red folder to at the precinct that very morning, instantly scanned the room. His eyes locked onto me standing near the head table. I offered a single firm nod and gestured toward my parents. My mother backed away, bumping into the toppled dessert table. She held her hands up defensively, her diamond bracelets catching the flashing red and blue lights filtering in through the large windows. Diane and Richard, the lead detective, announced, his voice projecting with practiced, undeniable authority. You are both under arrest for felony identity theft, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit financial fraud. My mother let out a high-pitched shriek. No, she cried, her voice trembling violently as the officers surrounded them. There is a mistake. I am the mother of the bride. We are hosting this event. You cannot do this here. We are wealthy, respectable people. Do you know who we are? The detective did not even blink at her desperate attempt to pull rank. Ma'am, turn around and place your hands behind your back, he ordered, stepping forward. Richard, who had been staring blankly at the floor, simply turned around and offered his wrists without a single word of protest. He was completely and utterly broken. The sharp metallic click of steel handcuffs snapping shut around my father's wrists echoed loudly. My mother, however, tried to pull away. A female officer firmly grabbed her arm, twisting it expertly behind her back. The second pair of handcuffs ratcheted tightly over the delicate silk of my mother's designer gown. You have the right to remain silent. The detective began reciting the Miranda warning loudly and clearly for the entire room to hear. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. The contrast was absolutely staggering. Here they were standing under imported crystal chandeliers, surrounded by towering arrangements of white roses, while the cold, unforgiving reality of the American justice system was read aloud to them. The wealthy uncles, the hospital administrators, and the defense attorneys watched in stunned, morbid fascination. Judge Williams stood near the exit, her arms crossed, watching the arrest with a look of stern judicial approval. She wanted to ensure the criminals were removed before she fully departed. The officers began the perp walk. They marched my handcuffed parents right down the center aisle of the banquet hall. My mother kept her head down, her face entirely hidden by her carefully styled hair, weeping tears of genuine agonizing humiliation. My father stumbled slightly in his rented tuxedo, looking like a hollow shell of the arrogant patriarch he had pretended to be just 20 minutes earlier. They were paraded in front of the exact people they had destroyed my identity to impress. It was a flawless, devastating execution of absolute justice. As the heavy double doors closed behind the police escort, a chaotic murmur erupted among the remaining guests. People were already grabbing their coats and making swift exits, eager to distance themselves from the catastrophic scandal. I stood near the head table, feeling a profound, sweeping sense of peace. The heavy, toxic anchor I had dragged behind me for my entire life was finally gone. Ryan placed a gentle hand on my lower back. "Are you ready to go?" he asked softly. I was about to say yes, when a sudden violent screech ripped through the air. Ashley, who had been huddled on the floor since Jamal left, suddenly scrambled to her feet. Her white silk cocktail dress was wrinkled and stained with tears. Her makeup was smeared across her cheeks in dark, jagged lines. She looked completely unhinged. She stomped toward me, her fists clenched tightly at her sides. "You ruined my life!" she screamed, her voice cracking with raw hysteria. "You took everything from me. Jamal is gone. Mom and Dad are going to jail. I have absolutely nothing because of you. I hate you." I looked at my younger sister. There was no pity left in my heart. She was a grown woman who had enthusiastically participated in a felony to fund her own vanity. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I simply looked around the massive, extravagant country club ballroom, gesturing slightly to the uneaten Wagyu beef, the open bar, and the towering floral arrangements. I took everything from you, I repeated calmly. No, Ashley. I just stopped you from taking everything from me. I picked up my small clutch purse from the table and stepped slightly closer to her, closing the distance so she could hear my final words with absolute terrifying clarity. Have fun paying for the country club tonight, I said. I turned my back on her for the final time, linking my arm through Ryan's. We walked together down the long center aisle, our footsteps steady and synchronized. We walked out of the banquet hall, out through the grand foyer, and into the crisp, cool night air, leaving Ashley completely alone in the ruins of the empire she thought she deserved. 6 months have passed since that spectacular collapse at the Oak Ridge Country Club. If you have never witnessed the federal justice system dismantle a conspiracy of wire fraud and identity theft, I can confidently tell you, it is a remarkably efficient and deeply unforgiving machine. The morning after the rehearsal dinner, the massive scandal had already ripped through our hometown like a Category 5 hurricane. The Williams family, utilizing their extensive legal connections and undeniable social influence, ensured that the narrative was crystal clear. My parents were not victims of a minor family misunderstanding. They were calculating financial predators who had been caught red-handed. The local prosecutor quickly coordinated with the FBI. Because I had handed them a perfectly wrapped package of digital evidence, IP logs, and undeniable audio confessions, there was absolutely no room for my parents to maneuver or lie their way out. The grand, arrogant illusion of their wealthy, untouchable status shattered overnight. It was immediately replaced by the grim, harsh reality of bail hearings, frozen bank accounts, and court-appointed public defenders. Diane and Richard spent the first 2 months trying to turn on each other. My mother attempted to claim she was manipulated by my father, while my father vehemently insisted my mother masterminded the entire scheme to impress Judge Williams. But the federal prosecutor did not care about their domestic squabbles. The Internet Protocol logs the forged electronic signatures, and the audio recording of Ashley implicating them both tied the legal noose perfectly tight. Realizing they were facing a brutal trial they could never possibly win, they ultimately accepted a plea deal. Last Tuesday, Ryan and I sat quietly in the back row of a federal courtroom. We watched my parents stand before a judge who was far less forgiving than Sylvia Williams. They formally pled guilty to felony identity theft and wire fraud. My father was sentenced to 36 months in a federal penitentiary. My mother, due to her direct role in forging the documents and utilizing my social security number, received 48 long months. On top of the jail time, the judge ordered massive financial restitution. They were forced to liquidate everything they owned, including their leased vehicles and their meager retirement accounts, to fully cover the legal fees and the court-mandated fines. As for the $80,000 fraudulent loan, the resolution was swift and absolute. Because the federal indictment explicitly named me as the verified victim of identity theft, the online lending institution had no choice but to immediately dissolve the massive debt. The glaring red flag on my credit report was completely wiped clean. My pristine score was fully restored, returning smoothly to the high 800s within a month. More importantly, my professional auditing license was never brought into question by my firm's ethical board. The system worked exactly the way it was designed to work when presented with undeniable, meticulously gathered truth. I did not have to pay a single dime or spend countless hours fighting aggressive collection agencies to fix the disaster my parents created. I simply handed the mess to the authorities and walked away with my life, my marriage, and my career completely intact. It was the ultimate, deeply satisfying vindication. I felt a profound sense of closure that finally allowed me to breathe freely for the first time in my adult life. And then there is Ashley, the golden child who believed she was entirely above consequence. Her lavish wedding was permanently canceled the very night of the arrests. Jamal completely cut all contact with her, blocking her number and her social media accounts immediately. His family blacklisted her so thoroughly that she became a social pariah overnight. Without my parents there to fund her extravagant lifestyle or blindly bail her out of her massive credit card debts, Ashley was forced to face the real world with zero safety net. She was evicted from her upscale loft when she could no longer make the rent. Last I heard from a mutual acquaintance, she had moved into a cheap, cramped apartment on the outskirts of the city. To survive, she was forced to take a minimum wage retail job folding clothes at a mall boutique. The irony is not lost on me. The sister who arrogantly demanded I wear something plain to her rehearsal dinner so I would not outshine her is now spending her days steaming and organizing dresses she can no longer afford to buy. She is completely cut off from the wealth and status she worshipped, left with nothing but the crushing reality of her own terrible choices. The universe has a fascinating way of balancing the scales when you finally stop protecting toxic people from themselves. I truly hope she learns how to properly budget now. As for Ryan and me, the permanent absence of my family has not left a dark void in our lives. Instead, it has created a massive, beautiful expanse of absolute freedom. We no longer spend our weekends dreading unannounced visits, aggressive text messages, or manipulative, tearful phone calls. We do not have to endure the subtle cutting remarks about my career choices or the blatant financial demands masked as mandatory family duty. Our house is truly our sanctuary now, completely free from the suffocating tension they used to track inside, like mud on their shoes. Without the constant draining stress of navigating my parents' manufactured crises and Ashley's endless tantrums, we have both flourished. Ryan's construction business has rapidly expanded. With a clear mind and renewed energy, he recently secured a massive commercial contract that he had been aggressively pursuing for over a year. As for my career, the clarity I regained after closing the door on that incredibly toxic chapter allowed me to finally accept a promotion to senior partner at my auditing firm. The immense emotional energy I used to waste trying to earn the conditional love of people who only viewed me as an automated teller machine is now entirely invested in a life that actually fulfills me. We spend our evenings sitting quietly on our back patio, drinking good wine, and making solid plans for a future that belongs entirely to us. I often think back to that fateful Saturday morning 6 months ago when I first looked at Ryan and asked him to immediately change the access codes on our front door. At the time, it felt like a purely defensive tactical maneuver designed to keep angry, desperate people out of our physical space. But looking back from where I stand today, I realize it was the most important symbolic gesture I have ever made in my entire life. Changing the physical locks on your house is relatively easy. You reprogram a digital keypad or replace a deadbolt, and the immediate physical threat is neutralized. But changing the locks on your life requires a much deeper, far more difficult level of strength. It means permanently revoking the emotional access you have blindly granted to toxic people simply because you happen to share the same genetics. It means recognizing that being a daughter or an older sister is not a binding lifelong contract to endure endless exploitation and blatant disrespect. When I locked my parents out of my house that morning, I was finally locking them out of my mind, my marriage, and my financial future. As an auditor, I closed their ledger permanently. I installed an unbreakable boundary, and when they tried to breach it, I fortified it with the absolute power of the federal law. I learned the hard way that you cannot heal in the exact same environment that broke you, and you certainly cannot build a secure, prosperous future while handing the keys to people who actively want to tear it down for their own selfish gain. Society constantly conditions us to believe that family is everything, that we must forgive every single trespass, and that walking away from your own flesh and blood is the ultimate moral failure. But I am here to tell you that sometimes walking away is the only possible way to survive. Sometimes the absolute most loving thing you can do for yourself is to step back and hand the people who consistently hurt you directly over to the devastating consequences of their own deliberate actions. You do not owe your sanity or your peace of mind to anyone. You do not owe your hard-earned professional success to a family that only values you for the resources they can violently extract from you. When faced with the ultimate choice, I chose my incredible husband. I chose my hard-fought career, and most importantly, I finally chose myself. Blood does not give anyone the right to destroy your credit or your peace. Have you ever had to use the law to protect yourself from your own family? Have you ever had to draw a hard, unforgiving line in the sand and walk away from the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally? Tell me your story in the comments below. Let this channel be a safe space to share the battles you have fought and won behind closed doors. If my story resonated with you today, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more true stories about surviving toxic families and proudly reclaiming your independence. Thank you for listening, and remember, the best revenge is a pristine credit score and an unbreakable boundary.